Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Let's just dive right into this, because today we are looking at a truly fascinating paper by independent researcher John Cantillo. It's titled Beyond Causal Closure: Reconciling Emergent Consciousness with Extraordinary Experience Through a Constraint-Based Framework. Now I know that is a total mouthful of a title, but what Cantillo is doing here is incredibly ambitious. He's taking the rigorous, established science of how the brain creates waking consciousness, and he's attempting to bridge it with the most extraordinary, completely unexplainable human experiences out there. And the kicker? He does it without breaking the rules of science. It's a brilliant intellectual tightrope walk, and I'm super excited to guide you through this framework to unpack exactly how he pulls it off.
So, this brings us to the central paradox we are tackling today. Can we explain near-death experiences and other anomalies without breaking the laws of physics? You see, we rely on science to explain our reality, right? And the established scientific view is that the physical world is a closed loop. Physical things are moved by other physical things. Simple enough. Yet, across history and across cultures, we have these persistent, documented reports of anomalous phenomena. People experiencing consciousness way outside their bodies, or a complete and total absence of time. These reports directly challenge our strict physical boundaries. So, how do we actually reconcile the two? To unpack this, here is our roadmap. First, we'll look at the consciousness paradox. Second, rethinking physical causal closure. Third, three modes of consciousness. Fourth, the Omnin substrate. And finally, a new scientific frontier.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the consciousness paradox, and what happens when neuroscience meets the anomalous.
The conventional view in contemporary neuroscience is actually pretty straightforward. Waking consciousness is strictly an emergent property of the brain. Billions of neurons fire, complex networks synchronize, and boom, you have the subjective experience of existing in the physical world. If the physical brain stops, well, consciousness stops. This whole idea is built on the principle of physical causal closure, meaning every physical event has a prior physical cause. But alongside our neat, brain-bound models, we have this profound friction. We've got phenomena that have been impartially documented by really serious researchers. For instance, we have Bruce Greyson's extensive work on near-death experiences, where patients report incredibly vivid, structured awareness while they are clinically brain-dead. We have Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker's massive catalogs of children with apparent past life memories, sometimes with actual behavioral correlations. And we have reports of non-local perception and these profound experiences of total timelessness. Now, while these domains are notoriously challenging to study, their recurring patterns seem to completely defy the idea that consciousness is just permanently locked inside the skull.
Which brings us to Section 2, rethinking physical causal closure and discovering the philosophical loophole.
The usual assumption is that if these extraordinary experiences are real and they aren't physical, they must be violating physics by somehow magically interacting with the physical world. But Cantillo makes this brilliant conceptual pivot. He essentially says, well, not necessarily. On one side, we have physical causation. This governs physical action, energy transfer, neurons firing, the whole mechanical shebang. But on the other side, we have phenomenal description. This is the first-person, qualitative, subjective structure of an experience, what it actually feels like. Physics absolutely dictates what moves physical matter. But, and this is the massive loophole here, physics doesn't strictly limit the description or the internal structure of our subjective phenomenality.
So the absolutely crucial point is right here. Phenomenality can be non-physical but causally inert. Now, what does that actually mean? It means your subjective experience can have a structure that isn't fully captured by physical equations, just as long as it doesn't introduce new, magical causal powers into the physical world. An extraordinary experience, like an NDE, doesn't violate physics because the experience itself isn't acting as some independent ghost force pushing atoms around in your brain. All physical events are still caused by physical events, for sure, but the actual experience of those events is allowed to be much richer and infinitely stranger than we ever thought.
Moving right along to Section 3, three modes of consciousness and the continuum of constraints.
Instead of thinking of consciousness as a simple on and off switch, Cantillo categorizes human experience based on constraints. Mode number 1 is our waking consciousness. This is defined as a highly constrained mode. In your everyday waking state, your experience is heavily filtered. Your brain's salience network is working overtime to prioritize sensory input that keeps you alive. You're tied to a specific location in space, you're processing linear time, and you're feeling your physical body. It's highly structured, it's stable, and it's heavily constrained by the physical environment because, well, navigating the physical world is its primary job.
But that builds into the second mode, extraordinary consciousness. Think of this as an intermediate mode. What actually happens when those intense, survival-driven constraints of the brain's network are reduced? Think about deep sleep, intense meditation, trance states, or extreme physiological trauma, like near-death episodes. As those sensory constraints relax, the boundaries of your experience expand. This allows for vivid, highly unusual, non-local awareness, and a totally altered sense of time. And crucially, loosening these neural constraints allows for these boundless experiences without breaking a single physical law. It's literally just a different organizational state of your awareness.
Finally, we reach the third mode, fundamental consciousness. This is the theoretical limiting case of minimal constraint. When sensory and bodily constraints are virtually completely absent, the phenomenology shifts to what is consistently reported by people all across the globe as unbounded awareness, timelessness, and total unity. Now, Cantillot and Kershely notes that this state isn't something we can directly measure with empirical science right now. Rather, its existence is inferred from the converging phenomenological reports of people who have experienced these profound states. It is consciousness completely untethered from the demands of having to navigate a physical body.
So looking at this continuum, we have high constraint in the waking state, moderate constraint in the extraordinary state, and minimal constraint in the fundamental state. The absolute key takeaway here is that these aren't different mystical dimensions or alternate universes. They are simply a sliding scale of organizational constraint operating within a single system. It's the exact same consciousness. It's just operating under different boundary conditions.
All right, Section 4, the Omnon substrate, or the invisible architecture of experience.
So, you might be wondering, what exactly is the single system that makes this entire continuum possible? Well, Cantillot introduces the concept of a provisional organizational substrate. And before you think this sounds like science fiction, let's just look at the history of physics for a second. Science frequently posits these provisional constructs to bridge unexplained anomalies. Back in the 19th century, physicists proposed the luminiferous etheria to explain how light travels. In 1917, Einstein introduced the cosmological constant to balance his equations. Today we have dark matter, something we cannot directly observe but mathematically must exist to explain the gravitational behavior of entire galaxies. Cantillot proposes the Omnon in this exact same methodological tradition. It's basically a heuristic bridge between observation and theory.
So let's carefully define it. The Omnon is a provisional, quasi-physical organizational substrate that structures phenomenality across space and time without introducing new causal powers. Let me be super clear about this. This is not a magical force field. Actually, scratch that. Think of it more like an organizational domain that aligns systematically with physical reality. Just like a physical field supports the variation of energy, the Omnon acts as the invisible scaffold that supports the structured variation of our subjective experiences.
Let's rapidly break down the core properties of the Omnon. First, it is ubiquitous. It's present everywhere across space and time. Second, it's organized by constraints, meaning it doesn't transfer physical energy or information. Third, it is strictly non-causal to physical systems. This perfectly maintains our rule that it doesn't push physical atoms around in your brain. Fourth, and this is fascinating, it allows for episodic structural persistence, meaning the organization of an experience can actually persist outside of standard linear time. And because of all of this, it theoretically permits the non-local phenomenology reported in those extraordinary experiences while completely obeying the physical closure of the brain.
Which leads us to the ultimate paradigm shift of this entire paper. The quote is, "The brain functions as a constraint modulating system." In this framework, your brain is not the sole engine generating consciousness from absolute scratch. Instead, it is a complex, biological filter interacting with the omninon. When your brain is highly active and focused on survival, it modulates the constraints to be very, very tight, giving you ordinary waking reality. But when the brain powers down or shifts states, the filter opens up, giving you access to the extraordinary.
And that brings us to our fifth and final section, a new scientific frontier, and our methodological takeaways.
So why does this theoretical framework actually matter for the future of consciousness research? Well, the crucial point is this: it's phenomenologically real but causally contained. For decades, scientists and experiencers have been at war. Experiencers say, my near-death experience was more real than everyday life, and hardline skeptics say, no way, it's just a hallucination because the brain is dying. Cantillot gives science a much-needed, disciplined middle ground. We can actually validate the absolute reality and structure of these profound experiences, acknowledging they are genuine reorganizations of consciousness without ever having to endorse supernatural causes or toss out the laws of physics.
And ultimately, this leads to expanding the boundaries of scientific inquiry without losing our rigor.
Now, yes, the concept of the Omnon is highly speculative right now. It doesn't completely solve the mystery of the hard problem of consciousness, but what it does do is create a safe, logically sound framework to study previously marginalized phenomena. It finally gives researchers permission to study past life reports, NDEs, and non-local awareness not as mere errors or brain noise, but as incredibly lawful variations in how our consciousness is organized.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this profound, perspective-shifting question to ponder. Based on Cantello's framework, is your everyday waking experience just a tightly constrained version of a much larger reality? Really think about that the next time you wake up from a wildly vivid dream or find yourself lost in a moment of total timelessness. Perhaps your brain isn't building your world from scratch. Perhaps it is simply focusing the lens on a much, much grander picture. Thanks for exploring this amazing concept with me, and keep questioning the nature of your reality.